Welcome to Deep Fear, where your darkest nightmares turn real. Tonight's story may just keep you awake, so let's start the video. And don't forget to subscribe. I moved into the old house on 19th Lane in late August. I remember the heat that day was suffocating, the kind that wraps around your lungs and makes every breath feel like swallowing steam. I was drenched in sweat by the time I got my final box into the living room. The house had sat empty for nearly 2 years. It was large, almost too large for one person. 2 stories, 4 bedrooms, an attic, and a basement. The ad described it as a charming fixer-upper full of character. I saw the photos online and fell in love immediately. I'm not sure what I was looking for exactly. Maybe space to breathe. Maybe an escape from my last apartment, where thin walls meant I heard my neighbors argue and stomp at all hours. Maybe I wanted to believe a big old house would mean a fresh start. When I signed the lease, the landlord mentioned the house had some quirks: creaky floors, occasional drafts, old wiring, all the usual disclaimers. He avoided eye contact when I asked about why it had been vacant. I thought he was just embarrassed about its condition. The first week was peaceful. I unpacked, set up my little reading nook by the bay window, and spent evenings on the porch with tea and a book. The air was different there, heavier, quieter. You could hear the distant hum of cicadas, and sometimes a dog barking somewhere down the street. Then, the small things started. The first time, I found the bathroom door open when I was certain I'd closed it before bed. I brushed it off as forgetfulness. Next, I woke up to find the hallway light on. I assumed maybe I had left it that way after going to the kitchen for water. But things escalated. A week in, I came downstairs one morning to find all the cabinets in the kitchen open. Every single one. Plates, glasses, pots, all exposed as if someone had been rummaging through them in a panic. My heart thudded in my chest as I looked around for broken windows or signs of forced entry. Nothing. The locks were intact, the windows secure. I even checked the backyard, but the gate was locked from the inside. I tried to rationalize. Maybe I had sleepwalked, maybe I was under stress from the move, but then things got more personal. One night, I found my toothbrush in the fridge. Another day, my keys were in the dryer, my socks turned up in the microwave. It felt like someone was playing with me, or studying me, testing how far they could push before I snapped. I called my best friend, Josh. He's the pragmatic type, never believes in ghosts or anything paranormal. "Dude, you're probably just overtired," he told me over the phone. "Big move, new place, your brain is fried, you need sleep, or maybe you're just messing with yourself." His words made sense logically, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. A few days later, I installed cheap security cameras, one in the kitchen, one in the hallway, and one pointed at the front door. That first night, I hardly slept. Every creak or groan of the old wood set me on edge. In the morning, I practically ran to my laptop to check the footage. Nothing. Just me, moving around like normal. I almost convinced myself Josh was right, until a week later, when I woke up to find muddy footprints on the kitchen floor. The footprints led from the back door to the sink, and then disappeared. The weird part? The back door was still locked from the inside. That morning, I reviewed the camera footage frame by frame. At first, it looked normal. Me entering, me leaving, me making coffee. But at exactly 3:17 a.m., the camera feed in the kitchen glitched. Just a short flicker. Less than a second. When it resumed, the footprints were there. My stomach turned. I called the police, and they came out to check. They found the footprints, but no signs of forced entry. No fingerprints, nothing. They said maybe it was an animal. Maybe I tracked it in and didn't notice. They gave me a polite but dismissive look before leaving. I felt more alone than ever. That night, I hardly slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured someone standing in the corner of my room, watching. I started keeping a kitchen knife under my pillow, something I'd never imagined doing before. A few nights later, I woke up to the soft hum of my bedroom door creaking open. I sat, bolt upright, knife in hand, my breath caught in my throat. In the darkness, I could make out a shape, a tall figure, thin, head cocked slightly to one side. My fingers tightened around the knife handle. I flicked on the bedside lamp in a sudden motion. No one was there. The door was wide open, but the hallway was empty. My mind felt like it was splitting. Was I hallucinating? Was I dreaming? I tried to calm myself down, telling myself that it must have been sleep paralysis or a nightmare. But when I looked down, I saw the doorknob, smeared with something dark. I crept forward, knife raised, and looked closer. It was mud. Fresh mud. That morning, I decided to search the entire house from top to bottom. I started with the basement. The air down there was cold and smelled of mildew. The concrete floor was cracked, and old cardboard boxes were stacked in the corners. I shined my flashlight into every crevice, half expecting to see glowing eyes staring back. Nothing. Next, I checked the attic. I hadn't been up there yet since moving in. The hatch creaked horribly as I pushed it open and climbed the narrow wooden ladder. The attic was dusty and filled with old furniture covered in sheets, chairs, a rocking horse, a mirror with a cracked corner. I moved slowly, my flashlight sweeping the space. In the far corner, I noticed something strange. A large, square piece of plywood leaning against the wall. I approached carefully. Behind it was a small, dark hole, just big enough for a person to crawl into. My heart began to pound. I shined my flashlight inside. I saw a thin mattress, a pile of clothes, some of them mine, and food wrappers. And then I saw something that made me stagger backward. A journal. I grabbed it with trembling hands and flipped it open. The first page simply read, "Day 48, he doesn't know I'm here." The pages after that were filled with obsessive entries, describing me in disturbing detail. Day 53, he talks in his sleep. He dreams about someone named Amy. Day 61, he drinks his coffee at 8:30 every morning. He forgets to lock the kitchen window sometimes. Day 75, he looked at me tonight. I think he suspects. My skin crawled as I read entry after entry. He had been here the whole time, hiding in the walls, watching me. The entries hinted at small movements, shifting furniture when I slept, moving items to test my reactions, leaving muddy footprints as a gift. The last entry was even more horrifying. Day 89, tonight's the night. I'm going to introduce myself. That was dated the day before. I dropped the journal and stumbled backward, nearly falling down the attic ladder. I ran to my room, grabbed my phone, and dialed 911 again, my fingers slippery with sweat. "Someone is living in my house! He's in the attic!" I shouted. The dispatcher told me to stay on the line and get somewhere safe. I bolted down the stairs and out into the street, barefoot, the cold concrete stinging my feet. I saw my neighbor's porch light flick on as I stood there in the middle of the road, shaking and gasping for breath. Within minutes, I heard sirens in the distance. When the police arrived, they went into the attic. I waited outside with my neighbor, clutching a blanket someone had thrown over my shoulders. I watched the front door, expecting them to drag him out at any moment. But they didn't. Instead, an officer came out and told me they didn't find anyone. Just the mattress, the clothes, the journal. No sign of the man himself. My mind was reeling. Was he still inside? Did he escape before I found the journal? Was he in the crawl space or hidden somewhere else in the house? I told them about the hole behind the plywood. They checked it, but he was gone. One officer mentioned they saw scuff marks on the walls leading to the basement, as if someone had recently crawled down. But after searching, they found no sign of him. That night, they insisted I stay with my neighbor, Mrs. Hawthorne, an elderly widow who had lived on the street for over 40 years. She made me tea and kept patting my hand, saying everything would be all right. But I knew it wouldn't. Mrs. Hawthorne's living room smelled of lavender and old books. Her floral-patterned couch scratched at my skin as I sat, shivering under a crocheted blanket she insisted I wrap around myself. She handed me a steaming mug of chamomile tea, her eyes kind but clouded by cataracts. "It's going to be okay, dear," she said softly, her voice trembling with age. "This neighborhood has always been safe." I didn't have the heart to tell her that her definition of safe had just been shattered. As I sat there, my mind replayed everything I'd read in that journal. The entries haunted me, each line a fresh wound. He leaves the bathroom door open sometimes. He likes to hum in the shower. He checks his phone too much. He's lonely. I stood right over him tonight. He didn't wake up. He looks peaceful when he sleeps. I almost touched his face. I could almost feel his presence still hovering behind me, a phantom brushing the back of my neck. The police returned to Mrs. Hawthorne's house later that night to update me. They had searched the entire property, including the crawl spaces, attic, basement, even under the floorboards. They found evidence that someone had indeed been living there. Discarded food wrappers, dirty clothing, and holes in the walls that connected different parts of the house like secret tunnels. But no man. "Do you have any idea who it could be?" Officer Reynolds asked me. I shook my head, tears brimming. "I've never seen him. I don't know anyone around here. I just moved in." Reynolds exchanged a glance with his partner, then nodded. "We'll keep a patrol car nearby tonight. You should stay here until we can be sure it's safe." I knew I wasn't going back. Even the thought of stepping inside that house again made me feel sick. I spent the night on Mrs. Hawthorne's couch, twisting and turning, my mind crawling with images of a man slithering through the walls like a rat. Every time the house settled, I jolted upright, certain he had followed me. Around 3 a.m., I must have dozed off because I awoke to a noise from outside, a slow scraping against the window. My eyes snapped open. I turned my head slowly toward the window beside the couch. At first, I thought it was just the branches of the old oak tree scratching against the glass. But then I saw it, a silhouette, pressed close, unmoving, almost merging with the darkness. A pale face, watching. My throat closed. I couldn't scream, I couldn't even breathe. We locked eyes for what felt like an eternity. Then, he tilted his head slowly to the side, like a dog trying to understand something. His lips curled into a thin, unnatural grin. I scrambled backward off the couch, falling onto the floor with a thud. The blanket tangled around my legs as I crawled toward Mrs. Hawthorne's bedroom, whimpering. She flung her door open, holding a small revolver with shaking hands. "What is it?" she cried. "He's outside!" I gasped, pointing toward the window. She shuffled forward and peeked through the curtain, but he was gone. Just the wind rustling the branches now. Mrs. Hawthorne called the police again, her fingers trembling as she dialed. When they arrived minutes later, they found footprints outside the window. Deep, deliberate impressions in the mud, leading away toward the tree line at the edge of the property. Officer Reynolds knelt beside the prints, his flashlight beam dancing across the ground. "These are fresh. He was here tonight. He's playing with you." The phrase felt like a knife to my chest. Playing with me. They took photos, checked the perimeter, then offered to drive me to a hotel for the night. I didn't hesitate. The hotel room felt sterile and empty. Pale yellow walls, a smell of cheap detergent, and the hum of an old air conditioner that sputtered every few minutes. I took the longest shower of my life, scrubbing my skin until it felt raw, as though I could somehow wash away his gaze. When I finally crawled into the bed, I left all the lights on. I kept the knife from my house. I don't even remember grabbing it, under the pillow. I must have drifted off because I woke up to my phone buzzing on the nightstand. It was a text from an unknown number. "You look so peaceful when you sleep. I'm in the room next door." Stomach dropped. My hands shook so violently I almost dropped the phone. I called the front desk immediately, gasping for breath. They sent security up to check the adjacent rooms. They found nothing. Nobody had checked into the room next to mine that night. The text had no sender ID. The number couldn't be traced. The police came yet again, reviewed security footage, and found no evidence of anyone entering my room or the neighboring room. They suggested it might be a sick prank, but the look in their eyes told me they didn't really believe it either. I packed up and left the hotel that morning, moving into another hotel in a completely different part of town. Over the next week, the texts kept coming. "You shouldn't have left. We were just getting comfortable. I liked your blue pajamas. You should wear them again tonight. You can run, but I'll always find you." I changed my number 3 times. I even tried switching to a burner phone. But somehow he always found it. Meanwhile, the police continued investigating my house. They tore open the walls and discovered a labyrinth of narrow crawl spaces. In some places, they found holes carved into the drywall, peepholes that looked directly into my bedroom, bathroom, and kitchen. They also found crude drawings on the wood beams, stick figures representing me, with lines connecting them to various rooms, as if mapping my movements. In the attic, they uncovered an old sleeping bag, a rusted knife, and jars filled with what they believed was urine. The journal pages were analyzed by forensic psychologists. One of them told me privately that they believed the stalker was deeply intelligent, highly patient. "I just wanted us to finally be together." My body convulsed in terror, every nerve on fire. His eyes darted over my face, studying me, memorizing every inch. "You moved too much. You changed too fast. But I'm patient." I waited. I watched tears poured down my face as he pressed the blade tighter. "Please," I choked out beneath his palm. He tilted his head again, that familiar motion, as if considering. Finally, he leaned down and pressed his forehead to mine. "I forgive you," he whispered. And then everything went black. They found me the next morning when hotel staff came to check why I hadn't checked out. I was alive. Barely. The blade had missed major arteries by millimeters. They said it was a miracle. The room, however, was empty when they arrived. No trace of him, no fingerprints, no footprints, nothing. I spent weeks in the hospital recovering. Carter visited me every day at first, then less often. Eventually, he stopped coming at all. I don't blame him. When I was finally discharged, I didn't go to a new house. I didn't go back to my apartment. I chose a psychiatric care facility, voluntarily. Somewhere I could be monitored, somewhere I wouldn't be alone. I still get that feeling sometimes. The sense that someone is standing just out of sight. The feeling of breath on the back of my neck. Sometimes, at night, I hear a soft creak by the door. And when I open my eyes, I swear I see a pale face leaning in, smiling, watching, waiting. Ever since I was a child, I have had a phobia of mirrors. Not in the typical, "Oh, I don't like my reflection" way. Number mine was deeper, more primal. It started with an incident when I was about 6 years old. I still remember it vividly. It was a rainy evening, and my mother was combing my hair in front of the old mirror in her room. The power had gone out, and the only light in the room came from a flickering candle on the dresser. She tugged gently at my hair, humming some old lullaby. I watched her in the mirror, but at one point I saw her reflection stop moving. It just froze. Meanwhile, my actual mother behind me kept humming, combing, unaware. I turned around in horror, but there was nothing unusual. When I looked back at the mirror, everything was normal again. I screamed, but she scolded me, telling me I had an overactive imagination. Since that day, mirrors terrified me. I avoided them whenever possible. I covered them at night and refused to keep any in my bedroom. Years passed. I moved away to college, then to my own apartment. I thought I had left the mirror incident behind me, a childhood trauma I could explain away as imagination. That was until last year. My new apartment came with a large, antique mirror in the hallway. It was bolted to the wall, so removing it wasn't an option. The landlord insisted it was an heirloom from the original owners and couldn't be taken down. At first, I avoided looking into it. I'd avert my eyes every time I passed. But over time, my curiosity won. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I needed to face my fears. One night, after a few drinks, I stopped in front of it and forced myself to stare into my own eyes. I stood there for nearly 10 minutes, repeating affirmations. This is just a mirror, nothing more. And nothing happened. I felt silly, embarrassed even. But that night, as I lay in bed, I thought I heard faint scratching coming from the hallway. I told myself it was probably a mouse or some pipes settling. But when I checked, the noise stopped. The mirror stood silently, reflecting the hallway's darkness. I returned to bed, convinced I was just drunk and paranoid. Over the next few weeks, small things started happening. Sometimes I'd catch what looked like shadows moving in the reflection, only to turn and find nothing. Once, while brushing my teeth, I glanced over and saw what looked like a dark figure standing behind me in the hallway. My heart nearly exploded out of my chest. I spun around. The hallway was empty. When I looked back, my reflection was smiling. But I wasn't. I stumbled backward, hitting my elbow on the sink. The smile vanished immediately as I looked again, and everything seemed normal. That night, I covered the mirror with an old bedsheet. The scratching started again. This time louder, like fingernails dragging slowly along glass. I sat on my bed, covering my ears, rocking back and forth as the noise continued for hours. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I fell asleep. In the morning, I found the sheet on the floor. The mirror was uncovered, and on its surface were long, thin streaks, almost like claw marks, but from the inside. I called my landlord, begging him to remove it. He refused. I considered breaking it myself, but something in me hesitated. As much as I hated it, I felt drawn to it, almost as if it was calling to me. A few nights later, I awoke to the sound of my own voice. It was coming from the hallway. I lay frozen in bed, straining to listen. "Come here." My voice, whispering, urgent. "Come here, look at me." Tears streamed down my face as I slowly got out of bed. My legs moved on their own, like I wasn't in control anymore. I stepped into the hallway. The mirror seemed to pulse in the moonlight coming through the window. My reflection stood there, smiling. But I wasn't smiling. It raised its hand and beckoned me closer. I took a step forward, trembling. Suddenly, it slammed its palm against the glass. The sound was deafening in the quiet apartment. I screamed and ran back to my room, slamming the door and pushing my dresser in front of it. I curled up in the corner, hyperventilating. Hours passed before I dared to look again. When I cracked the door open, the hallway was empty. The mirror looked normal. But there, on the glass, was a single bloody handprint. I called my best friend Tyler the next day. He came over, skeptical but concerned. I showed him the handprint, but it was gone. He examined the mirror, tapped it, even shined a flashlight all around it. Nothing. "You need to sleep, man," he said, clapping a hand on my shoulder. "You're overworking yourself." I wanted to believe him. But I knew what I saw. That night, Tyler stayed over, sleeping on the couch in the living room. I felt safer knowing someone else was there. But around 3 a.m., I heard a loud crash. I ran out to the living room and saw Tyler standing in front of the mirror. His eyes were wide and vacant, his mouth moving silently. "Tyler?" I whispered. Slowly, he turned toward me. His expression was blank. Then he spoke, but it wasn't his voice. It was mine. "Come closer." I bolted backward, tripping over the coffee table. Tyler turned back to the mirror, placed both hands on the glass, and pressed his forehead against it. I screamed his name, but he didn't respond. Then, without warning, he started slamming his head into the mirror. Over and over. The glass didn't crack. Instead, it seemed to ripple, as if it was liquid. Blood splattered across the wall. I lunged forward, trying to pull him back, but as I touched him, my hand passed right through his body, as though he wasn't there at all. I fell to the ground, staring in horror as Tyler's body began to sink into the mirror. Within seconds, he was gone. I called the police, shaking and covered in his blood. When they arrived, there was no sign of Tyler. No blood, no broken glass. They searched the apartment, took my statement, and left me with a warning about wasting police resources. I knew they didn't believe me. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. I started seeing my reflection move on its own more often, waving, smiling, whispering things I couldn't hear. I covered the mirror again and again, but every morning the sheet would be on the floor. I tried moving out, but whenever I stepped outside, the world felt wrong. People stared at me with hollow eyes. Cars moved too slowly, as if underwater. The air felt thick and heavy. I'd run back to the apartment every time, gasping for breath, my head pounding. It was as if the mirror wouldn't let me leave. Then one morning, I woke up and saw a note on my bathroom mirror, written in what looked like dried blood. "I'm almost ready to come through." I collapsed on the floor, sobbing. I knew then that it wasn't just about watching me anymore. It wanted to replace me. That night, I heard it again. My voice. "Come here. Come to me. Let me in." I resisted at first, but my legs moved on their own. I stood in front of the mirror. My reflection was grinning widely now, eyes wild and full of hunger. It raised its hands and pressed them against the glass. I tried to step back, but I couldn't move. It began to push forward, its hands emerging from the surface like they were made of liquid silver. It grabbed my wrists, yanking me forward. I screamed as my body collided with the cold glass. As my face pressed against the mirror, I felt the surface give way like a thick, cold liquid. I struggled, trying to pull back, but its grip tightened around my wrists. My reflection, or rather, the thing that had been pretending to be me, stared into my eyes with an expression of pure malice. "Don't fight it," it whispered, its voice vibrating through my skull. "I've waited too long for this." My head slid halfway through the mirror, my vision swirling into an endless darkness on the other side. It felt like I was drowning. I could hear faint echoes, my own voice screaming, then laughing, then whispering all at once. Memories started flickering before me. My childhood, my mother combing my hair, my first kiss, my old dog. But they started distorting, faces melting, voices twisting into inhuman shrieks. I tried to shut my eyes, but I no longer felt in control of my own body. Somehow I managed to wrench one arm free and slam my fist into the hallway wall. The sudden jolt loosened the creature's grip. With all my strength, I pulled myself back, crashing onto the floor. The mirror rippled violently, as if boiling from the inside. My reflection stood on the other side now, glaring at me, its head tilted unnaturally to one side. Then it began to pound on the inside of the glass, its mouth opening wider and wider, revealing rows of jagged black teeth. It started mimicking my voice, but each repetition sounded more corrupted, more monstrous. "Let me in! Let me in! Let me in!" I scrambled to my feet, grabbed a nearby chair, and hurled it at the mirror. The glass didn't shatter. Instead, it absorbed the impact, the surface rippling as if laughing at my desperation. I turned and bolted to the kitchen, grabbing a large carving knife. My plan was to pry it off the wall, break it from behind, anything. But when I turned back, the hallway seemed to stretch infinitely. The mirror was now impossibly far away, like I was looking down a long, endless tunnel. The air felt heavy. My ears started ringing. I took a step forward, but the floor felt soft and unsteady, like I was walking on flesh. I looked down and realized the tiles were gone. Instead, I was standing on a pulsing, veiny surface. It shuddered under my weight. I screamed and ran, but no matter how fast I moved, the mirror didn't get any closer. Then I heard laughter. My laughter. I turned and saw dozens of reflections lining the walls of the hallway. Each one of me, each slightly different. Some were covered in blood. Others had missing eyes or twisted limbs. One crawled toward me on all fours, its head jerking violently, smiling with a mouth full of black ooze. "You can't escape," it gurgled, its voice wet and echoing. "This is home now." I turned to run the other way, but the hallway had disappeared completely. I was now standing inside an endless black void, surrounded by floating fragments of mirrors. In each shard, I saw a different version of myself. One sobbing and pulling out clumps of hair. One standing motionless with eyes rolled back. One eating something unidentifiable in a dark corner. One clawing desperately at the glass. The shards started drifting closer, slowly circling me like vultures. I swung the knife wildly, but each time I slashed at them, they multiplied, filling the space with countless images of my tortured face. Then, from the darkness, the true form stepped forward. It looked almost like me, but taller, limbs longer than natural, skin pale and stretched tight over sharp bones. Its eyes were empty black pits, and its mouth hung open too wide, filled with tiny, writhing tendrils. It leaned forward and spoke softly. "I've watched you your whole life. You never really belonged out there." It took another step, tilting its head. "You're weak, scared, alone, but in here, we can be one, forever." I stumbled backward, my foot slipping on the slick, fleshy ground. "Come," it whispered again. "Join me. You'll never be alone again." I shook my head, clutching the knife so tightly my knuckles turned white. "No," I croaked. It lunged. I swung the knife wildly, slashing across its face. Black ichor sprayed out, burning my skin wherever it touched. The creature screeched, an unearthly sound that reverberated through my bones. I turned and ran. But in this endless black world, there was nowhere to go. Behind me, I heard it crawling at inhuman speed, its limbs clicking and cracking. In my panic, I noticed a faint glimmer far ahead, a small rectangle of light like a doorway. I sprinted toward it, my breath ragged, my mind fracturing with each step. As I reached the light, I dove forward, feeling the creature's fingers graze my ankle. Suddenly, I was back in my apartment. I slammed into the hallway floor, gasping for air. The mirror now lay cracked on the wall, a massive fracture running down its center. On the other side, my reflection was gone. But as I looked closer, I saw the creature trapped behind the glass, its pale hands pressed against the surface, its mouth moving silently. I crawled backward, unable to tear my eyes away. Then, the power in my apartment went out, plunging everything into darkness. When the lights flickered back on, the mirror was gone. Instead, there was a blank wall where it used to be. I sat there for what felt like hours, covered in sweat and blood, trying to process what had happened. Days passed. I stayed inside, terrified to look into any reflective surface, even the smallest puddle or the shiny side of a kettle. I taped over every mirror and every piece of glass. But at night, I still hear it. It whispers to me from behind the walls, from behind my eyelids when I try to sleep. Sometimes I see its silhouette standing at the foot of my bed, watching. Then, one night, I woke up to find a shard of the mirror on my pillow. It was small, about the size of my palm, with a jagged edge. On its surface, I saw my reflection, smiling. Then it spoke. It's my turn now. I felt an invisible force seize my body, paralyzing me. My own hand rose on its own and lifted the shard toward my eye. I struggled, screamed inside my head, but my mouth wouldn't move. "Shh," it whispered. "Sleep. You'll wake up on the other side." The shard touched my eye, cold and sharp. Pain exploded through my skull as my vision went white, then black. When I opened my eyes again, I was standing in the hallway. I looked down and saw my hands, longer than normal, fingers ending in black, claw-like nails. I touched my face and felt stretched, rubbery skin. I turned to the nearest reflective surface, a dark TV screen, and saw the creature's face staring back at me. Then I saw my real self inside the reflection, screaming silently, pounding against the glass from the other side. I tilted my head and smiled. "Finally," I whispered. Days turned into weeks. I started living my life as him. I wore his clothes, spoke in his voice, went to his work. People around me started noticing something was wrong. They said I seemed different, colder. Sometimes, in public, I felt my true self clawing from inside, trying to take control again. But I would simply smile into a window or a car mirror and watch him bang uselessly behind the glass. At night, I roam the streets. I look for others like him, the lonely, the broken, the ones who avoid mirrors out of some unexplainable instinct. When I find them, I whisper to them through reflections. "Come closer. Just a little closer." Once they respond, once they lean in, I pull them through. Then, they become trapped behind the glass, watching as I walk around in their skin. Now, my collection is growing. Sometimes when I pass by a large shop window or a puddle, I see dozens of faces pressing against the inside, screaming for help. But no one on this side can hear them. I know you're reading this now, perhaps sitting alone, maybe late at night. You might be tempted to look into your own reflection after this. If you do, listen closely. If you hear a whisper, if your reflection smiles when you do not, run. But it might already be too late, because maybe I'm already behind your mirror, waiting. When I was a child, my family lived in an old Victorian house on the edge of a small, quiet town. My parents always claimed it was a fixer-upper, but even as a kid, I felt something was wrong. The hallways seemed too long, the shadows too dark, and at night the house would groan and creak as if something was crawling inside its walls. There was one particular part of the house that always terrified me: the basement. My father kept it locked at all times. He said it was too dangerous because of exposed wires and rotting wood. But I remember once, when I was around 9, I heard muffled crying coming from down there. I pressed my ear to the basement door, trembling. It was a woman's voice, soft and broken, repeating the same phrase over and over. "I'm still here. Please, don't forget me." I ran to tell my mother. She glanced at my father, her face pale. They told me it was just the pipes, that I was imagining things, but I knew what I heard. After that, I started having nightmares. In my dreams, I would find myself at the basement door. I'd hear the same voice, but it would now sound closer, clearer. Sometimes I'd see a pale hand slip through the gap under the door, the fingers long and thin, nails cracked and bloody. Other times, I'd see a single bloodshot eye staring at me through the keyhole. I started wetting the bed again. My parents scolded me, but they didn't understand. Then, one morning, I woke up to find the basement door slightly ajar. The air smelled foul, a mix of mold, rot, and something metallic. Curiosity overpowered my fear. I pushed the door open further and peered into the darkness. A single dim bulb swung back and forth, casting erratic shadows along the staircase. I stepped down cautiously. Each creak of the wooden steps echoed like thunder in the silent house. As I reached the bottom, I noticed something odd. The basement was larger than I imagined, almost like an underground labyrinth. At the far end, I saw a small wooden door, covered in deep scratch marks. I heard the voice again. "I'm still here. Please." I approached, my heart hammering so loudly I thought I might faint. I placed my trembling hand on the doorknob and turned it slowly. The door opened to reveal a small, cramped room. Inside, a woman sat on the floor, her back to me. Her hair was long and matted, her white dress stained with dark patches. "Hello?" I whispered. She didn't move at first. Then, slowly, she turned her head toward me. Her face was wrong, sunken, pale, eyes impossibly wide, mouth stretched open in a silent scream. I stumbled backward, tripping over my own feet. The door slammed shut on its own, and I heard the sound of heavy locks clicking into place. I screamed for my parents. My father came running, grabbed me roughly by the arm, and dragged me upstairs. He was furious, shouting about how I should never go down there again. Later that night, I overheard my parents arguing. "He saw her! He opened the door," my mother hissed. "It's too late now," my father replied. "We'll have to move." We did move. A week later, we left the house, leaving almost everything behind. We never spoke of the basement again, but I never forgot. Years passed. I grew up, went to college, tried to live a normal life. But the dreams returned. The woman appeared more frequently now, standing at the foot of my bed, her mouth still frozen in that horrible scream. She began whispering in my ear as I slept. "I'm still here. Please, don't forget me." Eventually, I decided to confront my parents. I visited them during a long winter break. Over dinner, I brought it up carefully. At first, they denied everything. Then my mother broke down crying. "We had to," she sobbed. "We had no choice." She told me the truth. When they bought the house, they discovered that it had a hidden room in the basement. Inside, they found an emaciated woman chained to the wall. She had been left there by the previous owner, a reclusive man who vanished without a trace. My parents were terrified. They didn't call the police, fearing they might be implicated somehow. So they locked her in. They gave her minimal food and water at first, but eventually, they stopped altogether. "She wasn't supposed to survive that long," my father muttered. But she did, and she wanted revenge. After that night, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't live with the guilt, even if it wasn't my fault directly. I returned to the old house. It had been abandoned for decades now, covered in ivy, windows boarded up. I broke inside easily. The air was heavy with dust and decay. As I descended into the basement, the memories flooded back, the smell, the creaking stairs, the swinging bulb. I approached the scratched door. To my surprise, it was already open. Inside, the room looked exactly as I remembered. Chains lay scattered on the floor, and deep claw marks covered the walls. At the center sat a small wooden box. On top, a note in smudged ink, "You let me die. but I will never leave you." I opened the box with trembling hands. Inside was a tuft of matted black hair and a small, brittle hand, severed at the wrist. As I stared, I felt cold fingers wrap around my neck from behind. I gasped as the cold, bony fingers tightened around my throat. A sharp, rotten stench filled my nostrils. I struggled to turn around, but my feet felt rooted to the spot, as if the basement floor itself had come alive and wrapped around my ankles. "You let me die," a voice rasped directly into my ear, so close I felt her decaying breath on my skin. I managed to wrench my head slightly to the side. She was there. Her face was inches from mine, eyes sunken so deep they looked like empty wells, her lips blackened and cracked, teeth sharp and yellow. Her skin hung loosely, grayish, like old parchment stretched over bone. Long strands of matted hair clung to her shoulders and face, some dripping with a black, tar-like substance. Her other hand, the one not around my neck, reached forward and pressed a long, jagged fingernail into my cheek. "You left me down here," she hissed, punctuating each word by digging her nail deeper. Blood trickled down my face, warm against the icy chill of her fingers. "You all left me," she continued. "Your mother, your father. But you came back. You opened the door. You remembered me." A warped smile twisted her lips, as if she was savoring the taste of the words. Suddenly, she yanked me backward. The room around me began to change. The walls expanded, stretching upward endlessly. The floor below turned into a black, tar-like swamp, bubbling and shifting. I felt myself sinking slowly into the sticky darkness, the cold sludge pulling at my legs and chest. Above me, the woman hovered in the air, her limbs elongated and twisted unnaturally, her hair floating as if underwater. Her eyes glowed faintly, and she let out a deafening shriek that rattled my skull and echoed off the endless walls. I tried to scream, but the tar filled my mouth, choking me, pulling me deeper. Through the bubbling darkness, I saw flashes of faces, my parents, younger versions of myself, even strangers I didn't recognize, all distorted and writhing in agony. Each face opened its mouth wide, as if trying to scream warnings, but no sound came. Just as I thought I would suffocate, the darkness expelled me violently. I landed on a cold, wet floor, coughing up thick black slime. I looked around frantically. I was no longer in the basement. I was in a narrow, windowless hallway, lined with hundreds of doors. Each door had a name carved into it, some familiar, some completely alien. As I crawled forward, I noticed one door with my name. Noah. The handle was rusted, the wood splintered and covered in dark handprints. I reached out to touch it, my fingers trembling uncontrollably. Before I could open it, a deep rumbling sound filled the hallway. The other doors began to shake violently. From underneath each door seeped thick streams of black liquid, snaking toward me like living tendrils. They moved with terrifying speed, merging and forming a towering, shifting mass of darkness that sprouted dozens of pale, disjointed arms. I backed away in horror, pressing against my own door. From within the shifting mass, I heard hundreds of overlapping whispers. Some sounded like my own voice, others like my parents', some like the woman's broken cries. "Join us," they chanted. "Join us forever." Panicking, I fumbled with my door handle and pushed it open. I stumbled inside and slammed it shut behind me. The room I entered looked exactly like my childhood bedroom. The small wooden bed, the dinosaur wallpaper, even my old stuffed bear sitting in the corner. For a moment, I felt a rush of safety. Then I noticed the mirror on the wall. It wasn't there before. In the mirror, I saw myself as a child, sitting on the bed, hugging the bear tightly. But something was wrong. The child's eyes were completely black, and his smile stretched impossibly wide, splitting the skin at the edges of his mouth. I stepped forward cautiously. The child lifted his head and looked directly at me through the glass. "Remember when you left me?" he asked in a sing-song tone. "You promised you'd protect me, but you forgot. You forgot." The mirror surface began to ripple like water. The child crawled forward, pressing his hands against the inside, smearing dark red stains across the glass. I turned to run, but the room had changed again. The door was gone, replaced by solid walls covered in deep claw marks. The wallpaper peeled away in long, damp strips, revealing rotten, pulsing flesh beneath. My bed twisted and writhed, transforming into a mass of bones and sinew, forming a grotesque throne. Sitting atop it was the woman. Her body had fused with the walls, long tendrils of flesh extending outward like roots. Her mouth opened and closed rhythmically, releasing clouds of black mist. In the mist, I saw glimpses of my past, my first birthday, my first day at school, my mother's gentle hands washing my hair. Then each scene twisted into something grotesque. My mother's hands turned skeletal, her face melting. My schoolmates' heads split open, my birthday cake filled with crawling maggots. "You can't run from me," she said, her voice echoing from every corner of the room. "You let me die. You let me rot. Now you will take my place." I fell to my knees, sobbing, my mind fracturing under the weight of guilt and terror. "Please, I'm sorry. I didn't know. I was just a child," I screamed. But she only laughed, a shrill, echoing cackle that shook the walls. Her arms shot forward, her fingers extending and splitting into multiple sharp, bony claws. They wrapped around my chest and head, pulling me toward her throne of bone and flesh. I felt my skin begin to tear, my bones crackling under the immense force. My vision blurred, and the room seemed to spin, filled with red and black shapes. Then, just before everything went black, I heard her whisper again. "I'm still here, and now, so are you." When I woke up, I was no longer in my body. I was behind the mirror. I saw myself, or what used to be me, standing in the center of the room. But it wasn't me anymore. It wore my face, my clothes, but its eyes were pitch black, and its smile was impossibly wide. It turned toward the mirror and winked at me. Then it left the room, humming softly, leaving me trapped behind the glass. Days, weeks, months. I couldn't tell how long I remained there. I watched as my body went back to my parents, pretended to be me. I watched as it slowly corrupted them, whispering to them at night, driving them to madness. My mother gouged out her own eyes with a kitchen knife. My father locked himself in the garage and never came out. I screamed and pounded at the glass, but no one could hear me. Sometimes, at night, the woman would appear behind me in the mirror world. She would stroke my face and whisper softly, "Now you understand. You never escape. We all stay here together, forever forgotten." She would laugh, and dozens of other shadowy figures would join her, each one a lost soul, each one bearing twisted versions of familiar faces. Now, if someone comes into the abandoned house and finds the basement, they might see the mirror. They might see me standing silently, mouthing desperate pleas, but they never help. They just stare, and eventually, the darkness pulls them in too. And if you, reading this now, ever find yourself standing in front of an old mirror, if you see someone waving or moving when you are not, don't touch the glass, don't listen to the whispers, because once you do, you'll join us here forever. Forgotten. If you enjoyed this nightmare, like and subscribe. We'll see you in the next one.